Winter came to that town like a quiet accusation. It settled into the bones of the wooden houses, crept beneath doorways, and clung to the breath of every soul who dared step outside after sundown. The sky hung low and colorless, like it had forgotten how to forgive. Snow drifted down in soft, relentless whispers, covering tracks as if the world preferred to pretend no one had passed through it all. Eliza May Carter stood at the edge of that forgetting. Her shawl, thin, worn, and far too tired for a night like this, clung to her shoulders as though it, too, feared being cast aside. Her hands trembled, though she wasn't sure anymore if it was from the cold or from something deeper, something that had been freezing inside her long before the first snow ever fell. She had already knocked on 3 doors. At the first, a woman she once shared tea with had opened the door just wide enough to see her face, and then closed it without a word. At the second, a man had shaken his head before she could even speak. At the third, no one answered, but she had seen the curtain move. And now, there were no more lights in town that welcomed her. Only shadows, only silence, only the soft, biting murmur of voices that never quite reached her ears, but somehow always reached her heart. That's her, the widow. Poor Thomas, or maybe not so poor. People didn't say it plainly. They didn't need to. Judgment had a way of traveling without words. It lived in the way eyes turn away too quickly or lingered too long. Eliza lowered her gaze, her breath catching as the wind cut sharper against her face. She wondered, not for the first time, if grief had a scent to it. Something sour. Something people could detect from a distance and avoid like rot. Her husband, Thomas Carter, had been dead for 3 months. 3 months, and still, she had not been allowed to mourn him properly, because grief in that town was reserved for the innocent, and no one had decided if she was. Some said Thomas had taken to drink in his final days. Others whispered that he had been driven to it. There were murmurs about arguments, about doors slammed too hard, about a woman who didn't smile enough, didn't speak sweetly enough, didn't love the way a wife should. There had been no proof, only absence. And somehow, absence was enough to build a story people preferred over the truth. The church had stopped calling on her. The women stopped speaking when she approached. Even the ground beneath her feet felt borrowed now, because the house she once lived in had been taken, sold to settle debts she never understood and was never given the chance to repay. So she walked, because standing still felt too much like surrender. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, barely shielded her from the frozen earth. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the snow itself was trying to pull her down, urging her to rest, to stop, to disappear quietly beneath it. But something in her, some stubborn, flickering part, refused. Not hope. No, hope was too bright a word for what remained. This was something quieter, something like endurance. She reached the far edge of town before she realized it. The lights had thinned behind her, replaced by long stretches of darkness broken only by the skeletal outlines of trees and the distant creak of branches burdened by snow. The wind seemed louder here, less restrained by walls and people. And there, just beyond a leaning pine that looked as though it had weathered more winters than it cared to remember, stood a cabin. Small, weather-worn, alone. It looked less like a home and more like something the world had forgotten to take back. Eliza stopped. She knew this place. Or rather, she knew of it. Everyone did. It belonged to Caleb Boone, the quiet one. The man who came into town only when necessary, who spoke little and lingered less. The one people described in careful tones, not quite fear, not quite respect, but something in between. A man without a past anyone could confirm, and without a future anyone bothered to imagine. They said he preferred it that way. They said he didn't need people. And people, in return, decided they didn't need him. Eliza's breath hitched as she stared at the cabin. This was not the kind of door you knocked on unless you had no other choice. And perhaps that was the truth she could no longer avoid. She had no other choice. The cold pressed closer, as if to remind her what hesitation would cost. Slowly, she stepped forward. Each footfall felt louder here, more deliberate. The crunch of snow beneath her boots echoed in the stillness, betraying her approach in a way that made her want to turn back, to vanish before she could be seen. But she kept going, because turning back meant returning to nothing. And even nothing had started to feel too generous for her. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Her hand hovered just inches from the wood, rough, scarred, familiar with weather and time. She could feel her heart beating against her ribs, uneven and uncertain, like it wasn't convinced it should continue. What if he turned her away, too? What if this door closed like all the others? What if the last place left in the world simply refused her? Her fingers curled slightly, retreating for a moment before she forced them forward again. The knock, when it came, was soft. So soft it barely seemed real, as though even hope, in her condition, should not be too loud. For a moment, nothing. Only the wind. Only the quiet. Then movement. The sound of boots against wood. Slow. Measured. The door opened. Caleb Boone filled the frame like something carved from the same rough material as the world around him. Tall. Broad. Still. His eyes met hers. Not sharply, not suspiciously, just steadily. As if he were taking her in without trying to solve her. Eliza swallowed, her voice catching somewhere between her chest and her throat. I was told, she began, though she hadn't been. I need. The words tangled, broke, fell apart under the weight of everything she had carried to that doorstep. She braced herself for the sigh, for the refusal, for the door to close. But it didn't. Caleb shifted slightly, stepping back just enough to open the space beside him. I've got room by the fire, he said, his voice low, even untouched by the sharp edges she had grown used to. And I don't care who talks. That was all. No questions. No hesitation. No judgment. Just an opening. Eliza stood there for a heartbeat longer, as though her body had forgotten how to accept something without paying for it first. Then, slowly, carefully, she stepped inside. The warmth hit her like something unreal. Not overwhelming. No, it was quieter than that. A steady, living warmth that wrapped around her skin and sank deeper, reaching places she hadn't realized had gone numb. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its light flickering across the small room in shades of gold and amber. It felt alive, patient, unconcerned with who she was or what she carried with her. Eliza moved closer without thinking. Her hands hovered near the flames, trembling as feeling slowly returned to her fingers, sharp at first, almost painful, like waking from a long sleep. Behind her, Caleb closed the door. The sound was gentle, final, safe. He crossed the room without hurry and handed her a tin cup. Steam curled from its surface, carrying the faint, bitter scent of coffee. She took it with both hands, as though it were something fragile, something that might disappear if she didn't hold it tightly enough. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned his attention back to the fire, as if her presence required no further inspection. And for the first time in months, no one stared at her. No one waited for her to explain herself. No one measured her worth against rumors she could not silence. The silence between them was not heavy. It was kind. She sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath her weight, and stared into the fire as the warmth spread through her. Tears threatened, rising quietly without drama. She blinked them back, not out of pride, but because for once she didn't feel like she had to prove her pain to anyone. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling against the cabin walls like something desperate to be let in. But inside, there was only the fire, and the quiet presence of a man who had made space for her without asking who she had been. And in that small, flickering light, something within her, something fragile, something nearly forgotten, began, very slowly, to thaw. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like something uncertain of its welcome, pale light slipping through the frost-laced window, brushing against the rough wooden floor, settling gently along the edges of the room where the fire had burned through the night. Eliza woke before the light fully claimed the sky. For a moment, she did not move. She lay there beneath a coarse wool blanket, listening, not for danger, not for whispers beyond the walls, but for something she had not felt in a long time. Stillness without fear. The fire had softened into glowing embers, breathing a quiet warmth into the room. Somewhere nearby, she could hear the faint rhythm of movement, boots against wood, the low creak of a chair. Caleb was already awake. Of course he was. Men like him did not sleep long. Or perhaps they simply did not linger and rest the way others did. Eliza sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that had settled around her. For a brief, fleeting second, she wondered if the night had been imagined, if she might step outside and find the world waiting exactly as it had been before. Cold, closed, unforgiving. But when she stood and saw the second cup already resting near the hearth, steam rising quietly from its surface, she understood. This place was real, and so was the kindness within it. She moved toward the fire, her steps softer now, not hesitant, but mindful, like someone learning the shape of a new life one careful moment at a time. "Morning," Caleb said, not turning, his voice low and steady as always. "Morning," she answered, surprised at how easily the word left her. No questions followed. No expectations. Only the quiet exchange of presence. Days, it seemed, began like that in his world. Not with demands, but with small acknowledgments, the kind that asked nothing and gave something all the same. And so the days began to pass. Not quickly, not dramatically, but gently like snow melting under the first promise of spring. Eliza stayed. At first, she told herself it was only until the cold eased, until she could find somewhere else. Sumawara Prupe, somewhere that did not carry the weight of Caleb Boone's name. But each morning, she woke to the same quiet steadiness. Each evening, she returned to the same fire. And somewhere in between, without announcement or permission, she began to belong. It showed itself in small ways. She swept the floor one afternoon, not because she had been asked, but because her hands needed purpose. The next morning, she found a loose board near the doorway had been fixed. She mended a tear in one of Caleb's shirts, stitching carefully by the firelight. That night, there was extra wood stacked neatly beside her chair before she even thought to reach for it. They did not speak of these things. They simply noticed. And in that quiet noticing, something grew. Not love, not yet. Something slower, something steadier, something that did not rush to name itself. She began to laugh again, though softly, as if the sound itself might startle the world into remembering who she used to be. And Caleb, he listened, not with words, but with presence. Always present, always steady, never asking her to explain the parts of herself she was still learning how to carry. For the first time since Thomas had died, Eliza stopped feeling like a question that needed answering. She became simply a woman living one day at a time. But the world beyond the cabin did not forget so easily. It never did. The first sign came quietly. A glance held too long at the well. A conversation that stopped too abruptly when she approached the edge of town. Then came the whispers. Sharpened now. Certain. She's staying with him. Living there like it's nothing. Some people don't feel shame at all. And beneath it all the name. Boone. Spoken like something half accepted, half rejected. A man already standing outside the lines. Now made worse by the company he kept. It reached its peak the day Marshal Wade Harlow rode out to the cabin. The sound of his horse came long before he did. A steady, deliberate rhythm cutting through the quiet afternoon. Eliza was outside, hanging damp cloth near the line when she saw him. Her hand stilled. The old feeling returned, tight in her chest, cold in her spine. Not fear, not entirely. Something closer to expectation. As if she had always known the world would come knocking eventually, just not when. Harlow dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with practiced authority. His gaze moved over the cabin, the yard, and finally settled on her. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone measured, polite in a way that carried more weight than kindness. "Marshall," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Caleb stepped out behind her, silent as ever. Harlow's eyes flickered briefly toward him. "Boone," he acknowledged. No warmth there. No respect either. Just recognition. "I hear you've taken in company," Harlow continued, his gaze returning to Eliza. "Town's been talking. Caleb said nothing. He never did. But his presence shifted slightly. Closer, not protective in the obvious sense, but anchored as though simply standing. There was enough. Eliza felt it. And for the first time, she did not shrink. I needed a place to stay, she said. And you found one, Harlow replied. Convenient. The word lingered. Sharp. Implied. You planning on staying? He asked. There it was. The question behind all the others. Not concern. Control. Eliza opened her mouth but paused. Because something had changed. Not in the world, but in her. She glanced at Caleb just briefly. He didn't nod, didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. And that was enough. Yes, she said. Simple, clear, certain. Harlow studied her for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. Well, he muttered, adjusting his coat. Town's got a long memory. With that, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, taking the weight of his judgment with him, but leaving its shadow behind. The days that followed grew heavier. Supplies became harder to come by. The storekeeper avoided her eyes. The church bell rang, but she no longer wondered what it would be like to stand inside, because she already knew. And yet she stayed, because for every door that closed, there was still one fire that remained lit. Then the storm came, not the quiet kind, not the kind that whispered. This one roared. The sky darkened before its time, clouds swallowing what little light remained. Wind tore through the trees, bending branches until they groaned in protest. Snow followed, thick, blinding, relentless. By nightfall, the world beyond the cabin had disappeared entirely. It was in the heart of that storm that the knock came. Desperate, uneven. Caleb opened the door to find a man half frozen, panic carved into every line of his face. My boy, he gasped. He ran. Before the storm. I can't find him. The words broke apart in the wind. But they didn't need finishing. Eliza felt it immediately, that pull. The same cold that had once threatened to take her. Without a word, Caleb grabbed his coat. I'm coming, he said. Eliza stepped forward. I am too. He hesitated. Just for a second. The storm howled louder, as if to answer for him. Then he nodded. They stepped into the night together. The cold hit harder this time, not just against the skin, but against the will. Snow swallowed their tracks almost as soon as they made them. The wind stole breath, turned voices into fragments. But they kept moving, because somewhere out there, a child was alone. Time stretched, or perhaps it broke entirely. Eliza's fingers went numb, her legs heavy, but she pressed on, guided by something deeper than strength. Then, a sound, faint, fragile. Caleb heard it first. He moved ahead, faster now, toward the frozen edge of the creek where the ice had begun to crack under the storm's weight. The boy was there, curled, trembling, barely conscious, and the ice beneath him unstable. Caleb stepped forward carefully, testing each inch. Eliza, he said low, controlled. Stay back. But she didn't. She moved closer, just enough to anchor herself where the ground held firm. Slow, she whispered. You've got him. Her voice didn't fight the storm. It slipped through it. Steady, certain. Caleb reached the boy, lifting him gently, shifting his weight with practiced care. The ice groaned, cracked. For a moment, just one, the world held its breath. Then Caleb moved. Fast, decisive. Back to solid ground. Back to her. Eliza wrapped the boy in her coat, holding him close, whispering soft, wordless reassurances as they turned back toward the invisible promise of shelter. By the time they reached town, dawn had begun to break. Pale, quiet, almost reverent. People gathered slowly, drawn by the sight. The boy's mother rushed forward, collapsing to her knees as she took him into her arms, her cries breaking through the morning stillness. No one spoke at first, not the ones who had whispered, not the ones who had turned away. They simply watched. Eliza stood there, her hands empty now, her breath still unsteady, waiting for judgment, for something. But it didn't come. Not this time, because something had shifted, not loudly, not completely, but enough. Enough that when she lifted her head, no one looked away. Caleb stepped beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. And for the first time, She did not feel like she was standing outside anything. They returned to the cabin later that morning. The fire had nearly died, but not completely. Eliza knelt, placing fresh wood onto the embers, watching as the flames slowly began to rise again. Soft at first, then steady. Caleb set another chair beside hers. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. She sat down, not as a guest, not as someone passing through, but as someone who had chosen to stay. Outside, the storm began to fade, and somewhere beneath the melting snow, the earth remembered how to breathe again. Sometimes, the world will leave you out in the cold long before winter ever arrives. It will give you names that are not yours, stories that do not belong to you, and doors that never open no matter how gently you knock. But all it takes is one place that does not ask who you were, one fire that does not care who is watching, one quiet voice that says, stay anyway. And in that warmth, earned not through perfection, but through presence, you begin, slowly, to remember. You were never meant to disappear.